What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today we are reacting to here's what happens if someone invades the US. Now, this is something that will be very interesting because we know the military, budget that the US have and how much money they put into their defenses. I'll be very intrigued to find out what happens.
Same, but before we get into that, please subscribe to the channel if you're already not. We're close to getting 100K and we really want to get there.
In 2023, the United States topped the list of countries with the highest military spending, allocating $916 billion for defense.
That's a lot.
The gap was huge.
Yeah.
China came in second with $296 billion, followed by Russia with $109 billion.
Even though that's the top three countries, look at how much of a difference. Like, we know Russia's and China are proper on their military as well, but in comparison, that's baby money to what they're doing. Crazy numbers.
But even without the gap, the amount is huge. Just to give you an idea, there are 15 countries on this list, and if you add up the spending of 14 of them, you get about $1 trillion. Not much more than what the U.S. alone
14
spent
countries.
on its own. For those who love numbers, here's another fact. The figure amounted to more than 40% of global military spending that year in the whole world, and it's expected that the amount will only keep growing. By 2033, the U.S. will be spending up to $1.1 trillion on military expenses. But why?
Disgusting.
I mean, do they really need to spend that much? And does it actually make U.S. defense invincible? This is a complicated military
I
topic.
love his setup.
Look, this guy looks like he wants to invade the US with this outfit on. But 1 trillion is unreal, like crazy.
I need some coffee.
Need some coffee after hearing the numbers.
An unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if it slips your mind. And a big thanks to those who understand my wish to stay anonymous. Throughout U.S. history, only once did another country manage to invade the American capital. The British occupation, although brief, did happen. This was during the Anglo-American War of 1812 to 1815. The British attacked the former colonies after American troops had, in turn, invaded Canada and burned down government buildings.
Oh, wow.
That's the short and simplified summary. Washington, D.C. was picked as a target because of its symbolic significance, easy access from the sea, and the American troops' inability to defend it. Back then, the American Army still seriously lacked experience. And so on August 24, 1814, the forces of both armies met outside Washington, and the British Army easily defeated the volunteer American forces in the Battle of Bladensburg. President Madison and Secretary of State James Monroe almost got captured. Afterward, the British troops set fire to the Capitol, the White House, the Library of Congress, and other government buildings.
Damn.
The next morning, British soldiers were looking for ammo and other supplies to burn, but after an accident with powder barrels killed 30 soldiers, the British decided to leave Washington. The occupation lasted exactly 2 days, but it still had a huge impact because the enemy literally took over the U.S. Capitol and the president's family had to be urgently evacuated. Even though this was the only instance since the War of Independence when a foreign power did something like that, cases of intrusion into the country's territory did happen. For example, this happened during the Mexican War, but the occupation was short. The seized territory was small, and it's pretty hard to call it a full-scale invasion. So it turns out that for over 200 years, the U.S. hasn't fought with another country on its territory. Are there reasons for that? Oh, definitely. But first, let's think about possible attack scenarios. So you don't have to be a great strategist to understand it's best to attack where a country is least defended. If we look at the USA, what do we see? The country's surrounded by oceans on 2 sides, so we need to choose the right coast to attack. To do that,
Which is what the
hold
UK
on,
done, I
have a
think,
list.
back then.
Here it is. This is what the list of the 10 states with the highest defense spending in the
Virginia.
2022 fiscal year looked like. It's clear that
Do you think this is why he's staying anonymous?
Why? Because he's baiting out the numbers.
Yeah.
Maybe.
The numbers, the vulnerable points of the US.
Maybe. And I think maybe just the topics he probably covers, unfortunately, has to expose certain
It's
things.
very political, yeah.
And I think that's probably why he's anonymous, because
Yeah.
someone's going to feel type of way about it.
Yeah.
Why are you exposing our country's weak spots?
Yeah.
Especially when they got...
that Virginia, Texas, and California are at the top in terms of defense, but it's also worth noting that 7 out of the 10 states on this list are located on the east coast
Near
of the
the water.
country. Moreover, if you look at the map of the USA and how the military bases are located, you can also notice that a lot of them are concentrated on the east coast, as if it would be more logical to choose the west coast for an attack. Some experts discussing geopolitics online suggest that an invasion could be launched from the Gulf of Mexico to cut the country off from a significant portion of its oil supplies. However, there are two major caveats to consider. First of all, the U.S. has a strategic oil reserve for situations like this, and it's quite substantial. Secondly, an attack from the Gulf of Mexico puts the opponent in a tricky spot.
You know, US is very smart with their oil. They buy oil from other countries, but they actually have the biggest reserve in, I believe, potentially the whole globe. And the reason for that is they're draining other countries' resources with money. But then if they ever need oil themselves, they got the biggest supply just as backup.
Yeah, it's true.
Which is clever, but obviously it's good business for other countries because they're selling, right?
In response, the U.S. could hit them from 3 different sides. In short, this idea isn't great. But of course, we can't say with 100% certainty where an attack on the U.S. might be planned. It all depends on the opponent, the nuances of their tactics, the situation at the specific moment in time, and all that. And only if we rely on some arguments can we assume that an invasion might happen from the western side, simply because there's less firepower there. On the other hand, this difference in firepower is very small, so it's unlikely that choosing one shore over the other would provide any serious advantage. But what if there's a land invasion? There are only 2 options here because the United States only shares land borders with Canada and Mexico.
So it has to come from one end.
Meanwhile, all 3 countries are, at the moment, in neighborly partner relationships. A free trade agreement has been signed, and they all gain from the partnership. And not only from it, the U.S. and Canada have long been partners in defense and national security, plus mutual trade and investment between Canada and the U.S. support millions of jobs. To break such relationships, there has to be a really strong reason. And to be honest, I can't think of one. In short, the scenario where an invasion starts from Mexico or Canada is unlikely, at least under the current circumstances. Also, the military strength of Mexico and Canada falls short compared to that of the U.S. Plus, when countries are next to each other, they can quickly launch a counterstrike, and the U.S. definitely has the means to retaliate. No one would start a conflict with a clearly more powerful foe.
It's true.
But let's assume, just assume that something happened. I don't know, a strange virus made everyone super aggressive and made them attack the neighboring country. Because there's a vast desert in the southwest United States, invaders from the south will have to move either to California or Texas. Yep, you remember right. These are 2 states with the most personnel, and they're the ones focused on the defense industry. Not the best spot for an attack. What about the...
That's probably why they got so much money invested in their military, because they're on the border. But then the countries by the coast, for some reason, don't have as much, which I'm quite surprised about.
North in Canada. Well, the invaders will have to cross the Great Lakes to get to the major cities, or at least they'll need to force a few serious rivers. In most areas along the US-Canada border, potential invaders will find plenty of stunning national parks. It's really very beautiful there, but from a military value perspective, the territory, well, it's pretty much pointless. Canada has that kind of beauty too. Plus, in the event of an invasion, all those national parks would likely be filled with military personnel ready to defend. From this perspective, the terrain of the southern border, which is the border with Mexico, is more fitting for military operations. There aren't huge parks with forests and lakes, but there's the largest military base of the U.S. Army right in Texas, and launching an attack on the country in a spot like that would be extremely challenging. Looks like any land attack options are a no-go. So we'll have to think about attacking from the ocean on the west coast. But it's not so easy here either. I mean, this option is better than going overland and heading straight for a military base, but it's way easier to say, we're attacking the west coast of the U.S., than to actually do it. Mainly because the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are 2 huge bodies of water that serve as natural barriers, keeping North America apart from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Before launching an attack on a country from the sea, these obstacles will need to be overcome, and it has to be done.
At this rate, the only way to attack America is from space. And even I bet they got good defense up there because of Elon Musk.
Can you attack them with
from
the jets
space?
that they have?
Probably not.
And somehow without being noticed.
It's interesting.
This is hard. Transporting military troops and gear takes time. And during that time, the enemy will be extremely vulnerable in the open ocean, and the U.S. definitely won't just stand by and watch as a fleet from some country heads their way. So the ships will start bombing and sinking them using any available methods. The enemy will have to decide which ships to use for moving equipment and personnel. Larger ships are slow, heavy, and exposed, while smaller ones are at risk due to their limited range. The smaller the ship, the tougher it'll be to cross the ocean. And even if you manage to pull off such an operation, you won't win the war by shelling the shore from ships. You'll have to land troops. These operations are called amphibious assaults, and they're considered some of the most complex and dangerous in any war. With the U.S. having enough time, they'll be able to pull troops to the shore, and in the end, the invasion will probably not even start. The enemy will be defeated, unable to land on the shore or immediately after landing. So it turns out that for such an invasion to succeed, the U.S. Army would have to be unbelievably weak, while the enemy's army would have to be unbelievably strong. A scenario that's as far from reality as you can get. A good example of what a landing on the shore looks like is the landing of American, British, and Canadian troops in Normandy during World War II. This landing is the largest amphibious invasion in human history, and it was only successful because the enemy was misled. If the German command had known the exact date and location of the landing, all subsequent events would have unfolded quite differently.
It was a surprise attack.
And even though basically the Allied forces only had to cross the English Channel, such an operation still took several years of preparation and a ton of strategic maneuvers. Although it only took about 24 to 36 hours to actually cross the channel.
Thing is, it was probably successful then because of the lack of technology back then as well. Like, they probably was able to cross it without the US knowing, and obviously because it was a surprise attack from the sounds of it, it's just different. Now they've got like different type of radars, different technologies, where I'm assuming if that ever was to happen again, the US will probably know about it way before it even happens, which allows them to prepare. So back then it was like the technology isn't what it is today, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely.
And
Now imagine you have to cross an entire ocean, and the ways to track the enemy have changed a lot since World War II. Regardless of the size of the forces or their weapons, all of this needs to be delivered across a vast, unprotected stretch of ocean. Well, or by air. But in any case, the naval and air power of the U.S. can wipe out any opponent long before they reach the coast. Some experts even say that all the fleets in the world don't have enough aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships to break through the U.S. Navy. There won't be enough fighter jets to gain air superiority either. So maybe the two oceans on either side of the U.S. are the main reason why no one has invaded the country for 2 centuries. The U.S. is just too far away to get troops there. In any case, pulling this off quickly and without being noticed so that the U.S. troops can't get ready for the landing isn't going to happen. But the country has done everything it can to make something like this just plain impossible. First off, we should thank the military satellites, which are specifically made for gathering intelligence, navigation, and military communication. As of December 2018, there were 320 known military or dual-use satellites in the sky.
Yeah,
half of them belonging to the U.S., and the rest are split between Russia, China, and India. But these are very, very rough figures. Due to the high level of secrecy surrounding satellites, it's almost impossible to estimate how many exactly are in orbit. A satellite was first used for military-related purposes. It was a photo reconnaissance mission. The U.S. was the pioneer in this field, starting to work with military satellites back in the 1950s. For a while, the country even wanted to equip them with weapons to attack targets on the ground, but then they dropped that.
Imagine satellites in space with weaponry to shoot Earth, like they can lock someone down from the space. That's good thing they didn't pursue that one, because I think that will be everything's overkill at the moment, but that would just be next level.
Initiative. Today, satellites can track the movements of enemy forces, gather data, and send it to the relevant agency, and satellites work all the time. With such a level of aerial surveillance, sneaking up on the U.S. is just impossible.
Which is what I said about World War II. It wouldn't happen again.
Tunnel under the ocean. Military satellites don't just track enemy troop movements. There's also the Defense Support Program, and its satellites detect missile launches or spacecraft, even nuclear explosions, all using sensors that pick up infrared radiation. So even a sudden airstrike with missiles is off the table. But technologies for early detection exist not only in space. For example, there's a system called Relocatable Over-the-Horizon Radar. It's designed to provide wide-ranging surveillance of both aircraft and ships. This system covers a wedge-shaped area of 64 degrees at a distance of 575 to 1,865 miles. Originally, the system was meant for tracking the movement of ships and planes over the Pacific Ocean during the Cold War. This way, they could coordinate fleet movements well ahead of a fight. How? To put it simply, the system uses atmospheric disturbances to spot incoming threats. Right now, the enemy will also have to deal with the U.S. Navy's 11 nuclear-powered fleet carriers, which will spot the invasion long before it comes to landing on the shore. But there's one more thing that definitely needs to be mentioned in connection with U.S. defense, and that's nuclear weapons.
The red button.
Let's consider a really extreme case where countries suddenly decide that the planet is no longer useful to them, and it's time to use nuclear weapons.
Oh my God.
The
That's
U.S.
God
has
forbid,
about
yeah.
7,700 nuclear warheads in total, including 1,950 warheads ready for deployment via intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines, and planes, as well as thousands of others that are in storage or awaiting dismantlement. The closest country in terms of nuclear military power is Russia. They have a bit more warheads, around 8,500, but only 1,800 of them are operational. For comparison, China has about 250 nuclear warheads, a bit less than France, which has 300, and a bit more than the UK, which has 225. At the same time, a nuclear
UK's
war
at
with
fifth.
any country that has a decent capability is mutual assured destruction. This is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. It's a specific existing term. It refers to the doctrine from the Cold War according to which the use of weapons of mass destruction by both sides would lead to the complete destruction of both sides. Within this doctrine, it's impossible and pointless to suddenly strike the opponent with a massive nuclear strike. Everyone will just die. There will be no winner. So no country really has a decent incentive to nuke the U.S. It would just lead to mutual destruction.
Just everyone
By the way,
dies.
that's one hell of a strong deterrent. And no, taking out all American nuclear weapons beforehand won't work either.
Like they say, the best defense is offense.
Yep.
Yeah, that's basically what they got here.
If you believe the experts, it's practically impossible to eliminate the U.S. nuclear arsenal because it's based on a triad of land, air, and sea delivery systems. In short, you'll have to deactivate weapons from several types and at several locations all at once. For example, ballistic missiles launched from submarines are considered the most effective element of the U.S. nuclear deterrent since some of them are always out at sea. Ground-based missiles are also hard to eliminate since they're in fortified silos deep inside the country. You have to be really lucky as a saboteur to get in there. So it looks like for attacking the U.S. with nuclear weapons, the enemy needs to create their own missile defense system. No modern technology can pull that off. Well, all's clear when it comes to nuclear weapons. If they're used, there's only one scenario. Let's picture some kind of military miracle. Enemy forces cross the ocean without anyone noticing, then they manage to land smoothly on the west coast of the U.S. What a stroke of luck! What's next? Well, specialists
happens
and
now?
just people with good imagination believe that the country is going to be safe thanks to its geography. It's because of geography that the U.S. is never likely to be successfully captured by any foreign power.
One thing I will say, the US citizens, the amount of guns the citizens have will be able to defend the land attack. The citizens are an army themselves.
It's true.
You know that?
Yeah.
They are I think the US have the most weapons and guns in their country through citizens.
But that being said, what percentage of the citizens will actually go and fight for the country if that was to happen?
Everyone. It'll be very rare.
think so?
It's not like the UK. The UK citizens, I'll tell you now, British citizens will not fight for their country. I'll say that. I live in the UK. I'm telling you now.
You wouldn't fight for your
A
country?
very small amount would fight for the country. A lot of them will say, I'll go back to Nigeria where I'm from, or where they're, even though they're
Parents are from.
even though they're born in the UK, they'll fight for their parents' country and they don't say they're from Britain. What I respect about Americans, they are proud of their country, super proud, and they will fight for their country and they'll die for their country. And that's the reality. They will. I'm not saying every single person will fight for their country, but out of every 10 people, 8 will fight, or 7. In the UK, every 10 people, 1 or 2 will fight. That's the difference. It's true.
Yeah.
I'm not lying.
Look at the map. The continental part of the USA is huge. I mean, it's just gigantic. No matter which side the enemy invades the country from, they'll find the same huge variety of landscapes: forests, swamps, mountains, deserts, river systems, canyons. Different landscapes mean different conditions for fighting. To fight effectively, special training and sometimes equipment are needed for each landscape, not to mention the logistics of moving troops through these forests, swamps, mountains. Well, you get it. Depending on the area, different types of forces need to be used, and the invader will have to quickly adapt on the ground. At the same time, the American military in the same area will already be prepared for everything. And imagine what it's like to advance through open areas like deserts and plains. For American aviation, the enemy is like a target at a shooting range.
Yeah.
Military analyst
Oh,
Dylan
lost.
Lerke suggests that the combined military potential of the rest of the world would be insufficient to even get a foothold on the continental United States.
Imagine.
And the key word here is get a foothold, because it's not enough to successfully land in someone else's country. You need to advance troops inland, capture, and then also hold territories. In this territory, there are not only civilian facilities, but also military bases. According to their own public estimates, the U.S. has 598 military facilities in 40 countries, as well as 4,461 bases within the states. This is a list of the countries where U.S. military bases and facilities are located. Along with a large number of bases in Germany, the U.S. has major military facilities in Qatar and Diego Garcia Atoll, as well as in Japan and South Korea.
They're
The
international.
U.S. Armed Forces have about 1.4 million active duty personnel and 850,000 reservists. But some of these people are scattered around the globe, stationed at U.S. bases, overall about 10%. The rest of the military are inside the country, and they'll fight. Moreover, many of these
They will.
soldiers have real combat experience, and that might even be more important than all the technology and equipment. If you look at the military conflicts that have happened in the last 20 to 30 years, you can see that the U.S. has been involved in many of them one way or another. We're not considering the moral side of the issue right now, just the facts, okay? In addition, there were two wars where the U.S. was really involved as a fighting party: the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. The first one ended in 2011, the second in 2021, so pretty recently. I don't think I'll be wrong if I assume that the country and its commanders gained practical experience, and considering that the war in Afghanistan lasted from 2001 and it's the longest war in U.S. history, there was plenty of time to gain experience. Not
Yeah,
to
that
mention
war
that
went on for
wars involving the
ages.
U.S. are also a testing ground for new technologies that can later be used for the defense of their country. And don't forget about the civilian population in the States.
Here we
people
go,
who
what I was
also have
saying.
What you
guns.
said.
I'm telling you,
Guns
man.
Yeah.
that
It's
these
not a
people
joke.
know how to use. You can often see a quote.
If I was in Texas, I'll come out like Rambo. 5 straps, I have an RPG on my back.
Trying to come for my country.
I would be on a mad one.
On the internet that's attributed to Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet of the Japanese Empire during World War II. Here's the quote. "You cannot invade mainland United States. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass."
There you go.
In
Which
fact,
they would
there
be.
are no records that the commander-in-chief of the Japanese fleet ever said these words. However, this quote describes the situation in the U.S. pretty accurately. A new study published in the journal Injury Prevention on July 25, 2024, showed that of all gun owners, 78.8% own their firearms for protection.
There you go. That's a
58.1%
lot.
of gun owners carried their weapon outside their home in the past 12 months. 72% of gun owners named protection as the major reason for owning a gun, while 91% said it was the major or minor reason. And it's not exactly a new thing from recent years. Since 1972, the percentage of American households that own at least one firearm has stayed pretty stable, ranging from 37 to 47%. In
It's a lot.
2023, around 42% of U.S. households had at least one firearm. In fact, more than 175 countries around the world allow their citizens to own firearms, but the USA is in first place by a huge margin. Next are the Falkland Islands, Yemen, and New Caledonia, but they have 2 to 3 times fewer guns per capita. Well, I'm not making any bold statements, but we can assume that in the event of a potential invasion, ordinary Americans won't just sit on their hands.
Exactly. No, it's just going to
Especially
chill
since
out.
many actually know
They're
how
going
to
to
shoot.
fight. And
New
they
nuclear
like you said, they got shooting ranges. Their experience, they shoot out in the wild. Like the video we reacted to, the redneck video, they took the Brit guys and the Australian guy to shooting, and a Canadian guy.
Yeah.
And it was like nothing. It was just like, that's how normal day life.
And American citizens themselves, they're very patriotic about their country. They love their country as well. So
Yeah.
like you
They're not just
explained
going to sit there and
earlier,
watch it.
they will fight for their country as well.
You know when the drone thing happened, when there was random drones in the air, citizens started trying to shoot them.
There
With
you go.
rifle, like, bah, 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 bah. Obviously it's not reaching
Get away
space.
from our country,
But
aliens!
you had literally citizens shooting in the air trying to shoot down these
There
drones.
you go. They're protecting the
imagine,
country.
Imagine foreigners coming, trying
Yeah.
to take over your land, like trying to kill your families and stuff. They're not going to just chill.
Missile. In June 2024, the U.S. Air Force conducted a test launch of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile to provide confidence in the lethality and effectiveness of the nation's nuclear deterrent. To showcase their power, the military also released video footage and photos of the missile, which, let's be honest, are seriously impressive.
Yeah, that looks
The
sick.
rocket launched on Tuesday, June 4th at 12:56 a.m. local time from Vandenberg Space Force Base, located north of Santa Barbara along the coast of Central California. An intercontinental ballistic missile standing 60 feet tall had a warhead that flew about 4,200 miles and landed near a remote military base in the Marshall Islands, deep in the central part of the Pacific Ocean. The truth is, there wasn't an actual nuclear charge in the missile. They were testing a non-nuclear bomb after all. The U.S. Air Force claims that this test is not the result of current world events, noting that over 300 similar tests have been conducted in the past. They don't mean that the world is on the brink of World War III. On the contrary, they emphasize once again that it won't happen. About 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles, Minuteman III, are currently stationed at Air Force bases in Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming, where they've been on combat duty for more than 50 years.
That's mad.
Microwave weapon against drones.
That lasers.
The U.S. Navy plans to test its first powerful microwave weapon aboard a naval vessel as early as 2026.
Yeah, it locks
The
down
experimental
drones. It's
weapon
clever.
known as the Meteor Project will emit beams of intense electromagnetic energy to disable the electronics of drones. This will help avoid wasting ammo on shooting down such tech.
That's
Luckily,
good, though.
something
That's
like
clever.
energy can't run out, unlike bullets, for
Just
example.
turn it on
and
and
each
it
shot
just
is
falls.
relatively cheap, in theory. Microwave weapons are part of the U.S. military's interest in directed energy systems. This is a new type of weapon that can hit targets without solid projectiles. Along with microwaves, this includes things like lasers, sound waves, and even particle beams. Actually, the manufacturer of directed energy weapons, Epirus, is already supplying the military with powerful microwave capabilities designed to take out drone electronics. And now
There
the
we go.
Navy's getting ready to test how well the company's technology handles taking out unmanned surface vessels. Other countries, by the way, are also ramping up their production of directed energy weapons. Recently, the UK showcased its Dragonfire system, basically a
Dragonfire?
giant laser cannon capable of taking down airborne targets. And we're talking about really small targets at a range of 0.6 miles. Future technologies as they are.
That needs to increase.
You owe me a like.
Interesting video, very knowledgeable, learned a lot. What I will say, I think if America didn't invest so much in their military, and if the citizens wasn't all strapped up with, weaponry, there will be way more attempts on invasion on America. That's the harsh reality. But the reason why they invest so much is they probably know that.
To be prepared.
So they're making sure no one even comes close to mess with them. Because let's be
Yeah.
real, they have enemies and they have people who disagree with their politics, disagree with the way they do things, and look at them as like the power. And they would try to take over, but they know they can't.
It's impossible.
It's basically impossible.
Yeah.
Mad. Guys, thank you so much for the recommendation. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. For now, peace out.
Bye.